Hello, and welcome to Decoding Ethics, a podcast from the International Ethics Standard Board for Accountants. I'm your host, Jeanne Viljoen. In this podcast series, we explore how ethics and technology shape the future of the accountancy profession. Today's episode turns to a technology that is still emerging, but already raising some very important questions for the future: quantum computing. While much of the discussion so far has been theoretical, its potential implications for security, data assurance, and decision-making are very real and increasingly relevant. To help us unpack what quantum computing is, why it matters, and what professional accountants should be paying attention to, I'm joined by Clinton Firth, cybersecurity and digital trust partner at PwC, and twice published author of Quantum Computing. Clinton will guide us through the fundamentals, the potential opportunities, and the ethical and governance considerations that comes with the next wave of technological change. This conversation is about understanding what lies ahead and navigating uncertainty with confidence. To start, let's ground the conversation by demystifying what quantum computing actually is and why it's moving from theory to professional accountants need to understand today. Clinton, quantum computing often sounds abstract and futuristic. How would you explain it in simple terms for our listeners, and why does it matter now?
For sure. No, a pleasure, John, to meet everyone and to be on the podcast. So thank you very much and for the opportunity as well. Look, quantum computing and quantum mechanics have been around for a long time, and they've been very much an area of research that's been going on for quite a while, even back to 1950s and 60s, etc. And we always sort of knew a quantum computer was coming, but I think it's becoming a hot topic because we're seeing, I guess, so much innovation and so many breakthroughs really in what's actually happening in this space right now. And if I look back at it, I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, we were forecasting this to be maybe 2060, 2080, a lot of conjecture around the actual date. But really, with the breakthroughs we've had, what we're now seeing is probably an aggressive timeline of around 2029, when we will actually have an operational quantum computer. So hence the topic is becoming quite heated at the moment around this, and a lot of attention is getting on it. Now, I guess to your point on the fundamentals and what's the difference between what we call, I guess, our classical computing today. And I guess in the most simple terms, people understand that classical computers are based on bits, being binary numbers, so 0 or a 1. That's how we do it, and that's how we compute. Lots of zeros, lots of ones give us our computing power. The difference for a quantum computer is that it can be both or many states at the same time. So we don't actually know. So there's many different areas that it can do. So it's very good at certain types of calculations, which I'll talk about in a minute. But basically, it's not 0, not 1, and it's every state in between. And only when we measure it does it actually collapse, which comes into part of the sort of area of the quantum physics area. But importantly, what this practically means is that, these quantum computers will be very, very good at prime number calculation. And what this means in terms of, the innovation field is that we're talking about powering things that we have not been able to solve, even with our supercomputers of today. So we're talking about things like, complex math problems like weather patterns, looking at that. We believe it's also going to really superpower AI. And then one of the other areas that I'm quite concerned about is obviously, and the communities, especially in cybersecurity, is the one about cryptography and the actual threat that it poses to their overall. So again, quantum computers are going to be very different than the classical computers we have today. And they're certainly going to be very powerful in certain types of applications that we have in the future.
2029 is around the corner. That's kind of scary to think it's not that far off. Before we look at specific impacts, let's step back and consider the ethical dimension more broadly. So, Clinton, do emerging technologies like quantum computing introduce fundamentally new ethical challenges, or do they mainly amplify ethical issues that already we are facing?
Look, Again, a quantum computer and the power behind it is really compute power. So think of it like a supercomputer, but even more powerful than a supercomputer. So in itself, it's going to really not, I don't think, pose any additional ethical challenges. I think it will just amplify the ones we have from there as well. And again, I go back to the example of what I gave before about we believe that quantum computing will be able to really superpower AI. And probably the best analogy for it is that computer graphic chips to power AI, especially people would have heard from the provider called NVIDIA that provides those. And there are certain acquisitions made by AI companies to buy, like, let's say, 1 million of these NVIDIA chips, which is huge and very powerful. But arguably, one quantum computer could replace all those 1 million NVIDIA chips, for instance. So again, and that's going to power that AI, for instance. So again, the ethical challenges itself aren't going to change. It's just going to really amplify what they actually mean and do overall.
So we're going to touch a little bit on what the responsibility of professional accountants is going to be a little bit later. But first, I want to delve in a little bit deeper into the ethical implications. So which one or two ethical principles do you think would be most challenged by this powerful technology or
Mm,
quantum computing?
yeah, certainly. And I think I raised it before, but the area of that I'm quite passionate about is around the cryptography area. So if we think about the confidentiality piece of the ethical considerations and really that potential disruption to that encryption and data protection that we've got. So confidentiality is certainly one of the key principles that's going to be affected as well. I think the other area is really, that sort of professional competence, really, and probably that due care overall that accountants have and the ethics around that overall, because certainly this rapid change is going to require a new area of thinking potentially and an understanding of what's happening. It's not going to take away the basis of the fundamentals of ethics and what we have to do in this space. It's just, again, we have to be transparent. We have to be able to answer the question and look beyond that as well. And there should always be that human interaction to build that trust in the model as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I do have a question and wondering what ethical risk could arise if quantum capabilities are concentrated in a small number of organizations or jurisdictions. I can think that can actually create some problems.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because partly, obviously, the area of research and areas that we see, especially in all of our technology advancements, a lot of these advancements have come out of, let's say, government and the military overall before. So we do believe that obviously there's a fair bit of research already happening in quantum technologies, especially in these sort of industries, and therefore we would likely see the first probably operational quantum computer coming out of those industries. So that concentration of that capability, it could be nation state concentration of capability, and it could be defense and intelligence, let's say, concentration of the capability. So that ethical risk comes back to that confidentiality piece, right? The first nation slash military slash intelligence agency, if they have one, and maybe even have one today or tomorrow, will certainly have a significant advantage over others around being able to decrypt certain types of encryption. And therefore, that raises that confidentiality risk overall, that concentration of that quantum capability as well. And I think the other one is it will sort of, as we, these, even as they become commercially available, they're not going to be sort of widespread overall. And we have seen some acquisitions of quantum computers in research already by certain entities and even, nations as well. And I think this is going to maybe distort the market a little bit around power and quantum power, around that can power these other applications and or solve these complex problems, and therefore maybe even look at the decision making around these areas as well. So there certainly are going to be some significant first mover advantages, and then that will concentrate some of that risk as well. And it's no different than what we saw from AI. AI has been around for a long time. It's just that it's now been democratized enough that everyone has, arguably access to it now. with the technology like ChatGPT, et cetera, that everyone uses today.
That's very interesting. So let's bring this discussion a little bit closer to home and focus on what quantum computing could mean in practice for the accountancy profession specifically. So if we look at quantum computing, Clinton, what do you see as the most significant implications specifically for the accounting and assurance profession?
Yeah, I think it's really going to come back to the most significant areas is that the because the organizations and countries are going to look back to areas and professions like accounting to provide that trust and to provide that assurance overall, and therefore the ethics behind that. Obviously, that's going to present some significant challenges because it is really a significant area of research still overall. Now, we don't expect people to, necessarily understand quantum mechanics. We don't necessarily want people to understand the engineering side of it, but there needs to be a level of literacy around this, around, let's say, its capabilities of what it can do, its limits of what it can do. Again, not that engineering expertise. Accountants, like other ethical professions, also need to maybe, be able to have that human judgment, over uncertainty, a human judgment, let's say, over communication, and certainly be able to, ethically reason around what this is actually happening and what's actually going on in here as well. So, in summary, I think we just need to become literate. And again, pleased to be here today to help sort of break down some of these barriers as well as we go through as a first step for some of the professions.
Thanks, Clinton. One of the things that you've mentioned a few times is data security and
Mm.
encryption. So, how would quantum computing disrupt the current assumptions about data protection and ultimately trust?
Yeah, interesting. So the, the 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 funny thing is we've actually gone through something similar before, and if people sort of maybe people of my vintage, etc., used to deal with Wi-Fi, and they used to deal with what they call WEP, which is Wi-Fi encryption protocol. Essentially, now that was back in the 90s, right, late 90s, etc. That was basically underpinned by encryption, and then encryption was called Data Encryption Standard, or DES for short. 97, they built an algorithm that could break it. It took a computer about 92 days to break it. Within a few years, enough compute power was there, it could break it very quickly. So we had to move to a new standard. We had to move to new encryption algorithms, which is what we are using today. So everyone's very familiar with probably WPA, which is the encryption we use today, which is basically an advancement of what we had before, and it's called Advanced Encryption Standard. Very technical term, right? From there overall, but really that transition that we took started about 2001. Now, arguably, most organizations took about 5 to 10 years to actually do that transition. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of that old data encryption standard broken way back in 1997, actually still in infrastructure today. So the key message here is that we've gone through this before. And if anything, if you think back to 1997, where we were from a digital ecosystem point of view, it was certainly a lot more simple that way than we have today. So, the professionals in cybersecurity, encryption, and in quantum are really sort of calling for action around, a migration of cryptography as soon as possible, because that's the biggest sort of threat that we understand and we see today, and we know it's going to be a threat against certain types of encryption. So we have to sort of move relatively quick on this area as well.
So you mentioned literacy and having the professional accountants being able to understand. So what would you say is the skills and competency a professional accountant need to develop and to maintain to be trusted in this quantum enabled future?
I think the key word is curious, right? They have to be curious, and they have to, like any continual learning and development, we have to continue to ask questions, right? We have to continue to learn and develop ourselves as well. So certainly, participation in webcasts reading about, what's happening in the quantum area as well. Maybe even adopting some, potential forums, etc. Maybe even some governance roles around with maybe some of the research and academic areas as well. A lot of the people in this space are quite, you know, I guess, open about what's happening, and if the curious person asks the right question, then they're going to help, build their knowledge, build their capacity. Because I certainly don't have all the answers and no one else does at the moment. But I think as a community, we can all come together. And certainly from the accounting profession and ethics, we really haven't got to that point yet. Similar to sort of, where we are with AI at the moment, which is a big challenge around AI governance and ethics around that everyone's, really sort of asking about. But really, it's doesn't affect the principal standards of what the accountants do today in ethics. It doesn't change that they have to continue to safeguard that public trust. It doesn't not continue that they have to explore that transparency, and that transparency again will build further trust with the ethics piece as well. So everything we're doing today needs to be there. It's just going to be in a much more accelerated fashion. And again, you know, my ask to everyone here is to really be curious and to investigate around this so that they can build up that knowledge as well.
That's a really powerful message to stay curious and not to wait until you actually have the tech capabilities already available, because you need to ask the right questions already now. You mentioned about the ethical principles being relevant at the moment, but maybe do you foresee in the future that the ethical guidance and the professional standard might need to evolve to respond to these technologies? And if so, do they merely adapt the existing frameworks, or do you think we need to throw out the old and bring in some new ones?
Yeah, look, I think our existing frameworks and the evolution of them have served us, very well. Most people would argue overall. So I certainly don't think we need to throw it out per se. And I think again, if I look at back to the fundamentals of what a quantum computer will basically drive, is again that acceleration of technology from there, that acceleration of compute power, that acceleration of decision making, that acceleration of artificial intelligence. It's just going to mean things are going to move faster as well. So really, I don't think we have to throw out the old. I think we have to sort of maybe have a look at how we can adopt it maybe to that rapid pace that's going to be coming. Maybe even look at, how we can advise clients about, and I know we're going through this right now with AI, right? Advise clients about, should we adopt this that quickly? Are we asking the right questions around it? They just don't wildly adopt it. And there's a lot of obviously pressure for business to, be at that leading edge of innovation, take that competitive advantage as well. And I think, you know, things like the accounting profession and using, ethics, we need to ask the right questions to make sure that we're doing the right thing. We don't want to get down the road where we've adopted things too fast, too soon, and then we don't have the answers. We don't have that transparency and we erode that trust within the overall community as well.
A question that comes to mind is, what role does professional bodies and standard setters like ISPA play in helping the profession prepare for technologies that do become mainstream?
Yeah, again, I think it's really sort of being at the leading, edge of the business and coming back and asking those questions, understanding where, each of these businesses are going with that. What is their strategy to adopt certain things from there as well? So I think one lens, you've got to look at the sort of innovation side to understand where the business is going so that you can help advise them sooner rather than later from there. And I think the second one we probably need to look at as well, and again, that one that I brought up before was around the cryptography piece, right? So again, maybe the question that I'm asking a lot of our clients, and obviously in a lot of forums that I'm presenting at, is okay. Well, what are you doing about the cryptography problem? And it's, I keep saying to people, it's not a problem of tomorrow. It's actually a problem of today, because we do know that encryption will be broken once we have an operational quantum computer. And we have, yes, we don't have one yet, arguably, but we can see the future of one coming very soon. Right. And so we need to sort of start that transition. Therefore, comes back to that confidentiality piece overall. So we need to sort of challenge our clients a little bit around this, build that awareness with the governance boards, build that awareness with these areas, because again, we don't want to be in a situation where it's too late, where we're, rapidly trying to, let's say, change that cryptography, and it's going to take us years to actually go ahead and do it, when those very sensitive systems could be very vulnerable to certain attacks overall.
So you spoke about the future and you mentioned of what the professional accountant should be thinking now. So the next set of questions look a little bit to that end. So if we look about 5 to 10 years ahead, what
Mm.
concerns you and what excites you the most about quantum computers' impact on the profession?
Yeah, look, I think the concern that I've got, and I don't certainly have the answer yet, is about, you know, the adoption of quantum and these technologies essentially outpacing governance, right? And I think that's a bit of a fear that we've got. So that's a concern that's coming, and really that understanding of what that means from there. So really, again, that adoption outpacing, overall that governance that we need to put in place from here going forward. However, I think the opportunity is that in places like when we go ahead and build these rapid technology, rapid areas, I think it's an opportunity for the professionals, especially in the accounting and on the ethics side, because the business and the communities will look towards the accountants and the rest to help us build that trust, to basically have that ethics, to have that professional judgment, and to make sure that we can actually go ahead and address these areas as well from there. So certainly I see it as an opportunity, because I think if we can get this right, if anything, that's going to build more trust in the system overall, which will lean into more adoption, which will lead into more innovation, and that will overall help society, community, and the businesses as well.
That is super exciting and actually such a powerful message as well that you're sharing. So I want to focus a little bit more on ethics as well. So what would you say is that one ethical question that relates to quantum computing that professional accountants should be asking today, not tomorrow, but already
Mhm.
now?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, a decision. So when we start to talk about quantum and quantum computing, and you hear your organization talking about it as well, and again, be curious. Don't wait for them to say it, but go and ask them what they're thinking about this or what they're doing about it. But certainly, the question that we need to ask is, when we make these decisions, number one, can it be explained? Can we root that answer back to what we're trying to do? Can we defend against that decision that we're making as well from an ethical point of view? Do we understand the implications of that as well? And certainly that trust as well. Can that decision be trusted? Right? Because ultimately, these decisions we make today are going to be challenged tomorrow, because they'll shape the future as well. So we certainly need, again, be curious. But then the ethical question is really, in those decisions that we're taking today, can they be explained? Can they be defended? And ultimately, can they be trusted if we are going to get challenged in this area overall?
It is kind of the repeat that comes up. Says everything that we do as professional accountants is around that. So it is such an important message. Closing off, I would like you to share one key takeaway with our listeners about ethics and emerging technologies. What would
Mm.
that one key takeaway be that you would want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, maybe I may even pick two to be a bit selfish here
That's
overall,
perfect.
rather than just one. But certainly, look, technology will never stop evolving, and if anything, it will more rapidly even develop as well. However, we've got to remember that our ethical obligations do not change, and they will endure these overall changes as well. So we have to accept that the technology will keep ramping up. It will keep accelerating what we perceive beyond control at times almost. But again, those ethical obligations will endure throughout those areas as well. And it really comes back to the point that we've got the trust overall from the profession. So the business, the community, the governments will look back to accountants and the professions to ultimately provide that judgment and to go through that. They won't be trust, they shouldn't and won't trust machines ultimately. There always have to be that human in the loop. And I think this is where the accounting profession, the ethics will certainly be that human in the loop that needs to be there in order for us to trust these systems going forward as well.
That's such a powerful note to end us on, and it brings us back to why these conversations really matter, even when the technology itself feels a little bit distant.
Mm.
So, as we conclude today's discussion, it's a reminder that emerging technologies like quantum computing don't arrive all at once, but their implications can be far reaching once they do. While the technology itself is still developing, the questions it raises around data security, trust, preparedness, and the professional responsibility are ones we cannot afford to ignore. As with any innovation, the challenge is not only technical readiness, but the ethical readiness as well. Clinton, thank you so much for helping demystify quantum computing and for sharing your insights on what it could mean for the profession in the years ahead.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate the chance to come and talk today.
Thanks, Clinton. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with your colleagues who are also thinking about how future technologies will shape the profession. I'm Jeanne Viljoen, and this has been Decoding Ethics, Building Trust in a Tech-Driven World. Thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.